Hi all, Rick here. The Klingons favour two modes of combat above all others. The first is melee combat, in which Klingons' physiology and glory-seeking zeal gives them an advantage. In fact, more often than is tactically sound, Klingons tend to try to look for opportunities for boarding actions to get in close quarters combat where they should have the advantage. Unless they're up against plot-armoured Starfleet. The second mode of combat they favour is ambush and stealth tactics, often seen as a way to enable a skirmish and prolong a battle enough to enjoy the game, or as a way to get into position to earn a decisive blow. So I'm surprised it took us this long to actually get a vessel like the Nakjej class, also known as the Klingon Cleaveship. Leave it to them to find a way to marry these two favoured modes of engagement into a melee ship-to-ship combat. What if ship, but sword? In real life, the ship was designed to be a distinctly stylised and brutal statement of the Klingon Empire for Star Trek Discovery's first season. It was designed by John Dickerson and modelled by Max Reese and team before the Battle of the Binary Stars. In lore, it was House Hugat that pioneered this 2000 IQ move, and among the Empire it quickly became something of a trademark of their house. Only 5 were constructed, from 2180 to 2185, and it traces its origins to a time when the Klingon Empire's houses were more fractured, and each was inspired by its own histories and divergent cultures. The various houses did meet together to form strategy meetings in the late 22nd century to discuss the pace of expansion that the United Federation of Planets was undertaking. Of particular concern was the rapid deployment of numerous so-called starbases, both ground-side and, more worryingly, as space stations capable of spying and protecting their increasing borders. At least, this is how the Klingon Empire saw it. One method was suggested to deal with such space stations: the notion of ramming them with a massive cleave ship. This idea was dismissed by most credible strategists as an outlandish one, all except for House Hugat. Hugat was so enamoured with this idea that he commissioned 5 vessels constructed before the first was even tested. Upon completion of the ships, he demonstrated their effectiveness on a captured Starfleet vessel, and it worked. Then the Starfleet ship self-destructed, completely annihilating the Cleaveship, and Hugat realised how much money he had thrown behind this idea before testing it. Nevertheless, they existed now and would serve a function, albeit likely a risky one. The consensus from the High Council was basically, well, that was dumb enough to work, but I'm glad I didn't pay for it. By 2258, the Empire was in the midst of reformations and the founding of the Klingon Defence Force with the D7 series as its flagship. As such, most of the private house fleets were being decommissioned or relegated to uses beyond defence. This is the fate of the surviving Cleaveship. The vessel was 930.2 metres long. While impressive, thanks to the upscaling of many of the ships of the era, this is a rather middling-sized vessel for the Klingon Empire, and I think that detracts from its majesty. It had very powerful impulse engines that could provide an incredible force, but it had a poor turning rate. Likewise, its warp speeds were fiercely limited by its profile. To counter this, it had some of the latest invisibility screens technology, the predecessor to the effective cloaking device. While functionally the same, these screens were not as effective as a proper cloak, but aided in concealing this lethargic vessel from attack. There are at least 6 disruptor cannons, 2 forward-facing, and 4 that can swivel on the weapon's pods. It carried photon torpedo launchers, which could be fired from ports on the front and rear. Despite how long it was, it featured no broadside capabilities. but let's look at the blade. The massive bulk of metal was hollow but reinforced and made primarily from duranium. The blade on it was indeed honed to a razor's edge and maintained as much as any bat'leth. 6 layers of duranium, titanium and carbon nanoweave made up the outer hull, under which were duranium scaffolds to retain the shape, then 3 more layers of mixed alloys. Finally, at the hollow core was the 1.5 metre thick duranium framework. It was attached to the ship through a series of shock-absorbing locks that could unclamp to detach the blade if needed. This was for repair, replacement, or in case the guillotine did indeed get wedged in its target and limited the ship's mobility. The ship itself featured strong deflector shielding, reinforced hull armour, and absorptive hull plating for defence. However, the blade itself was relatively unprotected. While deflector shielding did permeate around the blade, the fact it was not crewed nor held any technology meant that there was little risk if it was struck, so the focus was not on protecting it. So besides its one-time trick of striking a ship and hopefully taking it down in one blow, the Cleaveship actually served a secondary function. It had powerful sensor arrays and accurate tactical scanners made to survey the chaos of the battlefield and work to locate a vulnerable target. This had the added effect of making it a great battlefield coordinator, as it could relay its observations to the rest of the fleet while under cloak, while locating a priority target for it to engage. When they found a target, they would manoeuvre into position and prepare to ram it. This is where some surprisingly complex calculations had to go on. They needed to ascertain the target's mass, movement, inertia, hull composition, and gather as much intel as they could in order to actually successfully live up to their ship's nickname of a Cleaveship. If they struck it at the wrong angle, speed, or if the enemy was too durable or in surprising motion, then they might simply bounce off the leading edge of the blade or simply get wedged on the front and pushed along. Things in space are big after all, and while severe damage could be inflicted, the desire was to actually cleave it in twain. Though having a near kilometre long hulk of duranium slammed into the side of your vessel is still going to mess it up regardless. Unfortunately, the resulting ship destruction, whether intentionally or accidental, often consumed the Nak'Zhezh. The Nak'Zhezh is a brutal ship, and I like that apocryphal lore basically makes it the result of one overexcited Klingon patriarch likely having a midlife crisis. Sure, slamming one of these into a starbase or vessel would certainly work to take it out, overwhelming the shields and sundering hulls. But when the target explodes in an antimatter breach, yeah, chances are you're losing the Cleaveship too, but it's undeniable that it sends a message. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the Cleaveship as introduced in Discovery. Of all the ideas that the show introduced into canon, at least this is one that I can get behind, because I would not want to be in front of it. Until the next one, I've been Rick, and thanks again. Goodbye. This was for repair, replacement, or in case the guillotine This was for repair, replacement, or in case the guillotine did indeed get wedged in its target and limited the ship's mobility. Why did I write that sentence? I hate myself.